Welcome everyone to the 11th session of the Disaster Response Collaborative. We're joined here today for the evacuation focus area session. So thank you for joining us. We are going to talk about from buy-in to bedside, engaging and equipping staff for evacuation readiness. We've got some great speakers for you today. It's interactive, and then we, of course, will head into our breakout room as well. We'll get more to that. For our acknowledgement, the Pediatric Pandemic Network is supported in part by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the United States Department of Health and Human Services. Today's content presented is that of the authors and does not necessarily represent the official views of, nor an endorsement by HRSA, HHS, or the U.S. government. We will be offering continuing education to physicians, social workers, nurses, and everybody really, because we've also have general CEs as well. Keep in mind that you need to attend the entire live session to receive credit. I want to ensure that you complete the session evaluation at the end of today's session, and ensure your name is on the session registration. So if you are using someone else's registration, just go ahead and type your name in the chat so that we have your attendance recorded. Also, at the end of the session, there will be a code for you to put into the CE portal, and all of that information will be on a slide at the end. So you've got that. Few announcements before we get started. Again, thank you all for being here. We know it's a busy week, it's a short week. So thank you for taking the time out to join us, to collaborate with us, and talk about evacuation planning. This session will be recorded. The recording and the slides will be posted to the website as well in the follow-up message, so you will receive that as well. Any questions you can add to the chat or the Q&A. We'll be happy to answer those either at the very end or throughout, depending on how much time we have. Again, CEs are offered to physicians, nurses, and social workers. If you are a EMT and can use general CEs, we offer those. And then MOC Part 4 credit will also be offered. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to email the DNC PPN at austin.utexas.edu, and I'll be happy to get you that information, and I'll put that right there in the chat. The last announcement I want to highlight is the PDPAC. So this is your big, large children's hospital assessment, asking you about your disaster plans and where you are in preparedness. And while we're going to keep that PDPAC open past July 9th, so don't worry about the July 9th date, we are asking for you and your hospital to complete the evacuation section on that PDPAC. Because we're also doubling up and using that as the DRC environmental scan, we want to collect all the data so that you have that before we really get into drills in a couple of months, full-scale exercises. So if you could, go ahead and complete the evacuation section. And if you have a second focus area, go ahead and complete that one as well. And we're asking for you to complete those by July 9th. And with that, I will hand it over to Annette, and we'll jump right in. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Julie. I am super psyched that everybody's here on the 4th of July week. So thank you for joining us. I'm not American by birth, but I have my citizenship. So yay, go America. So here's our agenda today. We have some fantastic speakers. And Julie, if you want to go to the objective slide. So here's our objectives. Remember, this is continuing the momentum from our leadership focused discussions in June. So this session brings us right to the front lines where evacuation planning truly comes to life, right? So by the end of the session, we hope that you'll be able to describe how to train staff effectively and inclusively, making sure all roles feel prepared, to identify practical strategies to gain staff buy-in. And we'll explore how really small shifts, like including staff in equipment selection that Jack's going to talk about, or using disaster carts and visual boards, can really build a culture of readiness that sticks. We'll understand, hopefully, the common barriers to staff training and engagement, especially things like turnover, time constraints, and confidence gaps. And we're excited because our breakout sessions will be a little longer today, so we'll have an opportunity to share. And then hopefully you leave with tips and tools that you can bring back to your hospitals, whether it's a training idea or a new piece of equipment, or really a fresh way to engage and connect with your frontline teams. So hopefully this session's about actionable takeaways. So next slide, please, Julie. So let's take a moment to really also reflect where we left off in June. So we emphasized that strong disaster planning starts at the top, and leadership engagement can't just be reactive. It needs to be woven into everyday readiness. We explored COOP and that it's not just for business continuity, it's central to evacuation readiness and long-term resilience. We looked at tools like the Disaster Olympics, which really resonated with me. I thought that was fantastic. And they really help break down silos and create space for both the C-suite and our frontline teams to connect with preparedness in a really approachable way. And then we discussed how crisis standards of care, like we're all kind of operating on the fringe, right? That edge of contingency care. And so having clear escalation plans before things tip is really key. And then lastly, one of the most actionable takeaways were those brief, regular check-ins with leadership, that 5 or 10 minute period of time, so we can keep the momentum going on a frequent basis without overwhelming their bandwidth. And so now let's shift from the strategic to the operational. So how we train, equip, and empower those on the front line to carry this work to the bedside and beyond. And we are thrilled to introduce two speakers. One of them is me, so I'm not thrilled to introduce myself, but definitely thrilled to introduce the other two. So if our first speaker is Jack Smith, and he is going to talk to us about equipment selection that was informed by clinical input. If you remember that first session, he talked about how he involves staff in the evaluations. And then after Jack, we'll hear from Shayna, who will talk to us about some real world exercises and gaps that she has found. So without much ado, we will turn the time over to Jack.
Matt, appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. So we just wanted to share with you guys a process that we started engaging in. So we have a new patient tower, 14-story tower under construction. And as we started engaging with the architects and engineers that we have in-house that are working on that project, and understanding the evacuation equipment that we use the Med Sled brand sleds for larger patients, and then the baskets for the NICU patients. And so as we were conducting evacuation drills with some of the inpatient units and evaluated where the anchor plates are mounted in the stairwells for that braking device. So if you're not familiar with the MedSled brand evacuation device, has a piece of 1-inch webbing. It's like a flat rope, if you will, and a carabiner that they use as a friction device to help lower patients, larger patients, down the stairs, that you wouldn't want to try to control that descent just with your own upper body strength. And so as we started evaluating where those anchor plates are in the walls, very close to the edge of the landing, which allows the patient, once they break that edge and start the descent down the stairs, they actually would travel several stairs with some momentum before the system actually took over and accepted their weight and then began to control their descent. So, most kids would get a big kick out of that, pay money to go to the amusement park for that kind of a drop. But when you start thinking about, patients that are post-op, maybe some orthopedic injuries or ongoing challenges with contractures or, other chronic health issues, dropping that patient, letting them slide uncontrolled 4 or 5 steps, and then that arresting that descent and a little bit of a shock load, not really the best as far as best practices for how we're handling patients. Factor into that, now you've traveled 10 flights of stairs and are starting to get fatigued, and you've got to do it again and over with multiple patients, and you can start to see how the ergonomics and the fatigue sets in, and that can magnify that from a safety factor. So that began to snowball our conversations. So as we started talking with architects and engineers, realized we needed to actually re-engineer some of the walls, beef up some of the walls in the stairwells because they're not masonry, they're metal stud and drywall. And so that we could reposition those anchor plates in the right location. So that began to evolve into a larger conversation with, well, why do we use this device? Whose decision was it? Did we engage the right people in making these decisions? And so we put together a little bit of a task force, representatives from each of the inpatient units that at least represented different levels of acuity and different challenges, clinical challenges, and looked at, probably a dozen different devices on the market, primarily focused on what's best for the patient, but also what provides the best ergonomics for staff members, and factor in that fatigue factor, because we're building a 14-story patient tower, but we have an offsite NICU location that's in another hospital here in the city that's a 24-story patient tower. So if the planning assumptions, which we're challenging all those planning assumptions, is that the clinician does not have to come back upstairs, that's great. But if we don't have enough evacuation devices, 1-to-1 patient ratio with the devices, then we're having to bring them back upstairs. So, really trying to look at this comprehensively in the overall system of do we have enough devices, who is actually doing the patient movement? Are we using patient transporters in addition to bedside clinicians, security, facilities and engineering folks? So kind of developing, looking at an evacuation team for those types of events as well. And so as we evaluated, I'd say close to a dozen different devices on the market. We landed on a couple of different recommendations, some with the same devices that we're using, but we're interested in a couple others, haven't made a complete decision yet. But a couple of those devices allow, especially for NICU babies and smaller babies, to be able to move six or so at a time. Either MedSled brand has a foam insert that goes in there. There's another device on the market that it's called an Evacu-B. It approximates a stair chair, but it's on caterpillar treads and can move up to 6 infants. And both of these devices have a place for oxygen, and they come with a manifold that's a splitter. But then, again, involving the clinicians, noticed that all of the dial-of-flow meters on this manifold are adult meters, and they're not capable of flowing less than 1 liter a minute. And so if you've got NICU babies that are on something less, 0.02 liters a minute, do we need to look at, and we've not been able to find anything on the market, so if anybody knows of anything, I'd love to network on that, but are we going to have to work with a vendor to have them develop a 6-way manifold for us that has, those microflow meters built into it? And so so we're involving respiratory in that discussion and challenging, okay, obviously a horizontal evacuation is kind of a no-brainer. If and I don't mean to underplay that, but typically the way we're set up, it's the same size, same type of unit, right? So if it's a NICU on the A side, it's a NICU on the B side, and we just move them horizontally to the next patient or smoke compartment. But going vertically, especially in some of our off-site locations, challenging, okay, does that vertical location have wall oxygen? Can they support the room air blenders necessary for some NICU patients? Or are they going to be living on portable bottles until, for some unknown time, till we do off-site transport? And so really looking at that. Back to, okay, the evacuation device. If we've nestled 6 babies in a device that moves 6 of them, is that something that supports managing their temperature and keeping them warm enough and during the winter months? Or do we have to now transfer them out of something else and into a different device? Obviously, planning assumptions are, in worst case scenario, you lose your elevators. So has anybody thought, and they hadn't, as we're evaluating this process, how are we moving isolettes downstairs? And we have a few transport isolettes. We don't have 120. And so what do we do for moving large numbers of NICU patients specifically, or if we have to move the whole hospital, evacuate the whole hospital, 400 and some patients, and looking at what are our off-site transport resources. We have through our regional healthcare coalition, we had a resource list. It's somewhat dated and needs to be updated. But looking at ground transport, rotor wing, fixed wing, what resources do they come with to be able to transport those high acuity patients, or is that something we need to provide? And that quickly becomes not just a regional, but a statewide, multi-state event to move that many patients to other children's hospitals. Kind of like what happened with Children's Hospital in New Orleans during Katrina. And to be able to move, upwards of 400 pediatric patients is probably going to be a nationwide type of event, I would anticipate. So that has really, by engaging the bedside clinicians and folks in operations, facilities, engineering, patient transport, on and on, we get a much broader perspective to bring those questions to the table. Hey, did you think about this? Hey, we didn't think about that. And so that as we develop a much more comprehensive evacuation plan, some of these nuts and bolts on the logistics side have really been QVV'd, run to ground, and we're not trying to figure this out in the heat of a moment of an emergency type of evacuation. So while it seemed like a kind of a nice customer service oriented one team approach to engage some of those stakeholders in just the evaluation of the evacuation devices, that's also bringing a much broader perspective on the clinician side as well as the operations side into the conversation, so that our overall evacuation planning provides some of addresses some of these considerations on the front end. So I think that pretty much covers it. Anybody have any questions?
That was great, Jack. I loved how you pulled in that multidisciplinary kaleidoscope, really, of perspectives to enhance your response. Thank you for sharing.
Jack, I had a question in terms of you're addressing the evacuation, but what has been the feedback in terms of once you get, assuming you get everybody out, staging, and then setting up an alternate care site to have at least more control over the medical evacuation or destination decisions, that type of thing? Are you planning for that at all as part of this scenario?
Yes. So that topic has entered into the conversation. We're very early in that process. We do have with our campus covers several city blocks. So, we've looked on campus at other clinical areas. But as was kind of addressed in the earlier session earlier today about surge capacity locations being reutilized or reallocated for adult patients in a situation where it was a children's hospital attached to an adult hospital, and always vying for that space. That's a challenge that we have as well. Our GI clinic, as an example, is a alternate care location for a vertical evacuation. But one of the considerations is if we have to dump the entire tower, where are we putting that many people? We don't have that many other spaces. So that's one of those planning assumptions I think that we have been able to successfully challenge and get people to start really thinking, okay, that works if you're just evacuating 1 or 2 floors. But if we have to do all 12 or 14, we need to take a much broader look at that. And does our alternate care facilities, we need to look off campus, or what's our staging area for transport, and can we provide that same level of clinical care during that staging time?
Any more questions for Jack? And he's not going anywhere, so if you want to write them in the chat too, if you think of something while the rest of the session's going on, please reach out to Jack.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move along to Shayna.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, Jack, I really appreciate you bringing in the clinician discussion. I do a lot of disaster work with the military, and sometimes they forget to bring in medical, and then we respond to humanitarian missions or whatnot, and all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, 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 this doesn't make any sense. Stop right there. So I really appreciate making sure that you're, really in the discussion at the ground floor, literally, since you're in the build process. But so I'm going to talk a little bit about staffing concerns and involvement. We recently had a large-scale exercise, and in this top left picture, if you can you see my cursor? Back here in the corner behind the tent, off to the left is somebody in a uniform. So we decided for this large-scale exercise, we were going to bring it, perfect, thanks so much, the military to work with us too, because you may or may not know, the National Guard in each state has different medical components that were designed to augment any disaster response at a state or regional level. And so part of what happens is when we respond with a local entity for a disaster response, not everybody knows who you are or what your capabilities are, or they think, great, you're going to do this job, I don't have to. So part of what we found in our exercise is that staff, when they do exercise, like to simulate things as opposed to actively hands-on doing them. And as we know as clinicians, if you're going to do a procedure, you really need that muscle memory. And so when they're like, we are deconning now with water, and they're saying it, but they're not actually doing it, are they developing that muscle memory? Not so much. So part of what we found at our institution is that we have a hard time with staff buy-in. And I know we're not the only ones. I've had this discussion on multiple, levels and nationwide, but it's really hard to get staff buy-in. And if they're not training, then a response happens. They're not going to be as comfortable with that response. And they think an online training is equivalent to a hands-on training, and that when the time comes, they'll know exactly what they need to do and be able to do it. But because in Utah, we don't have a lot of yearly disasters, ours is more waiting for a giant earthquake, but at that point it will swallow our children's hospital. So, we really don't, it's harder to get buy-in. When I worked and lived in Texas and it was hurricane season and we wanted to do a drill, I got great buy-in, right? There's going to be another hurricane, or there's going to be a freeze, or there's going to be something weather-wise that's going to happen, or we're going to have a heat issue and potentially part of the hospital might lose electricity. These things happen on a regular basis. And so it was easier to get staff buy-in. I think the C-suite level was more encouraging of staff participating in exercises on a regular basis. But I have found that in Utah, we don't have a lot of yearly disasters. And so because of it, the staff buy-in is lower. They also feel like at our hospital that online training and or a small little sit around a table and just chat about procedures is adequate. And we have found that that is not adequate. And so what we're hoping is to engage more C-suite level and or encourage more of our staff to do exercises every other year or so, make it part of the routine and the rotation of training that they're doing. So I would imagine that a lot of you have the same issues. We, again, in terms of trying to solve this, I think really finding ways to motivate your staff to want to participate in exercises. Yes, it's fun, but when it's their day off, it's really hard for them to want to come in. We find that we get a lot of people who register and they're very excited to participate. And then we start to get the cancellations as the lead up to the exercise. And so is there a monetary incentive? Is there an extra couple hours of time off incentive if they come in and do this? What are ways that we can get staff to really do this? I don't like the word mandate a lot, but when it comes to staff training, sometimes I think we just, if we could get C-suite to mandate hands-on training, then I think we could really feel comfortable with ensuring our staff have at least had maybe one exercise under their belt. This picture was taken at our new campus in Lehigh. We have a second campus. So a lot of the staff there are newer and really haven't done the exercise drills at our old hospital with us. And even if they have, and now they've come to a new hospital, it's a very different setup. This hospital is brand new versus one that was built many, many years ago. And so as Jack talked about, the equipment's a little bit different. Our setup in the hospital is a little bit different. And I like to think it's better than our original hospital. And it is because it's newer. But, so there were some other things that went into planning it. But you really need to practice for the location that you're going to be responding at. And that tends to be, I think, our biggest issue with exercises. And that was kind of what I wanted to chat about a little bit. And if anyone has any questions, or honestly, if anyone has any thoughts or ideas to really help with staff involvement with training, I'd love to hear any suggestions you have. We have tried different things. One of the new things we're going to try actually is getting our C-suite to come down and you can pie them and then potentially decon them. So that was one of the things we threw out there. And I think we'd get some more people to come and do that, right? Who doesn't want to do that? But then the question becomes, again, when it's lead up to the day of doing it, a lot of people are going to be excited and then the cancellations are going to roll in. So that was kind of our thoughts on that.
I love the pie and decon. That is so awesome.
Isn't that great? The other thing we talked about, which I know, in schools, you'll do the germ, the glow light germ, and we can put that on the decon, put it on someone on like a gown or whatever, and then have them have to scrub it off, or on even a decon suit, which you can truly clean, and say, how well did you decon someone, right? Because if they're like, oh, I'm deconning them, and they're sort of acting it out and pretending, they're not really scrubbing. We have done 2 decon exercises and we have yet to turn the water on. The other thing that happened, which I vaguely mentioned, but I'll say maybe in a little more detail, is that when the military showed up with their decon capabilities, then our staff was like, oh, you guys are great, we'll let you decon. And they're like, no, we're augmenting your decon. You're the primary decon. And so what we decided was that the litter patients would decon through our decon room and our staff, and the walking wounded could decon through the military side. But if you don't practice it, it takes time figuring out who's going to do what when this giant response happens. But again, no water was turned on, or at least not much. So I'm going to look. There were a couple of, free lunch. That's a great one. Yeah, people do like food. Bring in the... So we did have the clinical side was the planning team. We had nursing, we had physicians, we had mostly clinical staff actually for the planning, but that's a great point. and free lunch. Yeah.
I just want to say I was present for the exercise Shane is talking about, and I thought it was fantastic. They also did the first patient drone pickup, which was totally mind-boggling. Like, it wasn't a real patient, although I probably would have volunteered for it if that had
I
gone.
did volunteer, but it's not legal yet by FAA standards. So
But yeah, they picked a mannequin up by drone, which was pretty fantastic. And then Julianne, I know she's online, and she was the lead for that exercise, and she did a fantastic job.
yeah, it was great. But you know, when the days leading up to it, we were getting really nervous. All the staff were canceling. So we had enough. They did a great job, but
Sheena, I just want to mention, you know, a lot of times cost is paying for staff time is a
Mhm.
big issue. But as a former educator at Stanford, where, you know, there were benefits of a certain amount of education time. The hospitals typically do not do not budget, I should say, to the full allocation of education time that their entire staff deserves. They maybe budget for about 70%, but most staff do not take all of their education time. And so it's a much smaller dollar amount. So one of the things that might be interesting to take a look at in the hospital is, you know, how much is the difference between what they budget for education time versus what is staff actually take. And to because I would imagine that there's plenty of money there to be able to allocate a paid staff to participate in these activities.
Well, that's good to know. And I guess that's a good question we should look at our institution. How much education budget is there? Is there a way to incentivize it? Because if there's extra budget that's going unused, could we purchase lunch or something to incentivize participation? That's a great idea. And
Because I mean, in California, we have unions and stuff. So these are things that the organization has to budget for and that staff have a right to. But in reality, it's just not used to its full extent. So it's a worthwhile conversation to have from an economic point of view.
yeah, thank you, Pat. Stephanie Buckley said she had a decon team. If she could unmute, she could offer suggestions. I don't know how that works. So Annette or
Yeah, and then just for everyone listening, some of these conversations we'll address in our breakout rooms too. So Pat, I love that you brought it up, and those discussions, please flow freely when we go into breakouts about some innovative ideas, because we'd all love to hear them.
Thank
Julie,
you
can
so much.
you? Oh,
Yeah, hi. So I'm at Children's Nebraska in Omaha, Nebraska, and really our leadership has built it in, and we've had a decon team, and we run from 27 folks to 30 folks every year, and that's mainly because our leadership approved a $500 additional stipend to those individuals who are on the decon team. But again, they have to go through all of the training and all of the requirements and participate in the exercise. They have to participate in at least one full scale exercise. And we actually recently just did one. And one thing I will say that got a lot of people to even just other staff as well, not just people on the decon team that wanted to be a part of it, was I offered, I was asking for volunteers, and then we actually had, I asked for staff's kiddos to participate as the patients. And so then it was kind of like a fun day for their kids to kind of, go through a little water park through the decon. And so that was a really great experience. I was able to get 16 kiddos, which I was really kind of proud, but also I wish I could do more because they wanted to do 25. but we are also one of the only decon teams in our city. So I think there's a lot of pride being one of those. So that's kind of how they've incentivized things here. But also, as Patricia had mentioned, luckily they offer volunteer hours here too. And so staff were able to use that as well to kind of help supplement and be a part of it. But I'm still working on trying to figure out how I can get clinical staff, especially physicians, to come in. So I'm also in that same boat.
So that's interesting. With our highly infectious response team, we have a good amount of clinicians and then some nurses. But for our ER con teams, we have one lead and then we have some other folks that are trained. But I feel like they do their walkthrough training or their online training and then they call it good. But I like the idea of that stipend, particularly in the summer for our folks, because as shifts sometimes go down and people get called off, then they lose money on that. And so incentivizing in the summer financially might be a big draw. That's a great idea. But I'll stop there because I know we're going to talk about it in our breakout. But thanks for sharing.
And Stephanie, I just want to hug you right now because you totally tied in, you know, leadership and C-suite buy-in with boots on the ground and on all of that. So, and then the other thing that I love is that you use kids in your drills. And so maybe we can pull in Julianne, who has some just jewels that she learned from using kids in drills in Utah. But maybe we can get you guys both on a session to talk about the positives and the kickbacks of using kids in drills. That might be a great session. I know Julianne's probably cringing right now, but yay, there we go. Well, let us move on to the next segment that I think is me. So I'll be super fast. I wasn't looking forward to this as much as I was to hearing from Jack and Shayna. So next slide, Julie, was this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about creating a readiness culture. And this is, these are my pictures. So this is not my personal toilet, but this is the toilet where I worked in a clinical setting. So in my clinical role, Toilet Talk was one of my favorite low-cost, high-impact tools, right? And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's short disaster preparedness messages placed in restrooms. And this particular restroom happens to, again, be my favorite because it's the largest. And it was also where I was sitting when the 5.7 earthquake hit in 2020. And I'd never been in an earthquake before, so I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I thought the seal was loose on the toilet, but anyway, it wasn't. But you've got a captive audience here, right? And they can't say they haven't seen the education because everybody pees at least once in a 12-hour shift. And we used to slide it in plastic sliders so it can be wiped clean because that's gross if it can't. But it can be rotated really easily. And we found that they should be there for like at least a week, right? Because there's these rotating staff. So we'd put a message up and a picture typically was really helpful. So staff would be attracted to the picture or a meme, something typically dark humor, borderline inappropriate, because that's sometimes the only way you get staff to actually read anything, even as they're sitting on the toilet. But we did it so that staff could begin to start and associate preparedness with day-to-day work, right? Without needing dedicated training time. So that's Toilet Talk. Next slide, Julie. And another favorite is we made disaster cards and disaster cards and disaster cards. So you can see I put some pictures of them there, but we placed them so they were just as visible as the line cart or the respiratory cart and all the carts that are all in a row. So there's all of these life-saving carts. And then there's the disaster cart because it's life-saving when you need it, right? So they were placed in central areas on the unit. So staff walked by them every day and it normalized preparedness. It was just another cart and it was part of that clinical environment. And if you notice, so initially that Open Me First wasn't on there and it was actually a staff request because you guys know that all the disasters happen at 2 a.m. on a weekend and who's working working then, right? So they wanted to know exactly which draw to go in first, because this is a charge nurse draw. And then they needed to pull out a list with exactly what they needed to do on that list. And it was, you know, it was relatively easy to put together. And we got these carts free from property redistribution, and they were on wheels. And so they were super easy to move, so we could use them for drills and exercises. And then it included all of the disciplines. So you can see that our cards were not just nurses, not just CNAs, et cetera. It included respiratory, our MDs, our APCs, et cetera. So that was super easy. And the cards are wipe clean, again, because gross. So next slide, Julie. So this one is another like super low hanging, right? It's cheap. It's actually free. So this was a unit disaster board, and we put it along all the other communication boards, because I don't know about your units, but our unit has like boards all over, and one of the boards turned into the disaster board. So it was stocked with actually pull and go tips, so that staff could pull how to put a go bag together. They could pull out how to turn off their gas. There we had disaster calendars, so what to buy in certain times of the month, like family disaster plans. And then in there was also our training, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But then staff could just pull and go. And that was, you can see some of the examples that we have on there in addition to our training for disaster. So next slide, please, Julie. So this is really an example of how we brought disaster preparedness right into the unit. And we were kind of creative about it, because I don't know, I'm a nurse by trade, and we kind of have this dark sense of humor, right? So we started with seasonal themed drills to keep things light and memorable, like Santa's workshop caught on fire, and there was this long list of people that were injured, and his elves were all in an explosion, and so it became funny but sick, and then we were treating Santa and his elves. And then we had a Halloween theme, so we had these little Halloween statues that became patient triage, with props and tags, and they were hidden all over the room that we were doing the disaster drill in, behind pictures like this. So you can see, this is one of our favorites, this little light of mine, I'm going to make it shine. So that's dumpster fire, right? That's code for terrible things always happen all in a row, and it's a dumpster shift. So so we put things underneath those kind of tags so that they would remember it. And then we had Easter eggs, you know, those little plastic Easter eggs with patient triage in, so they'd open their Easter egg that we hid around the room, and then they'd have to talk about how they would triage that patient and what they would do and where those people were going to go. We actually had them call other units so we could load level patients. And then one of the things that we integrated was, you can see that incident command board that was specific to our unit. So it was how we would load level, where our patients go, who would be assigned to what, and it had to be who was on the shift at the time we did the drill. And it was wipe clean, again, super easy, but it also gave that hands-on and fun component. But it allowed staff to repeatedly practice roles and make those decisions. If there was no charge nurse, or sometimes we'd kill off the charge nurse, right? Because we wanted somebody less senior to be able to stand in. So it was like the ceiling collapsed on the unit during the 7.0, and now you're the charge nurse. So what are you going to do, and who are you going to assign? So, and then we layered, we did tiered training at staff meetings. So we started off super basic with 101, then we went to 201 and 301. And staff meetings are a time, everybody has to attend so many staff meetings a year. They are mandatory, otherwise they don't get raises. And so this was a way to kind of scaffold that muscle memory in without overwhelming anyone. It was a really short segment during our staff meeting, but it allowed everybody to get that training, and then it also went out via email. And these actually started off voluntary. So we integrated the disaster mock training with our mock arrest training, which was mandatory. And then people could stay 3 hours instead of the 2 hours for just their mock arrest training, because we didn't want people to come in for just a single hour for disaster training. And then we collected feedback, and then it actually, because of the feedback we collected, it went to mandatory training. So staff now have to attend 2 disaster trainings a year along with their mock arrest training. So it was a really kind of fun way to integrate and data collect with patients. All right, next slide, please, Julie. And this is my final slide. But this is really one of my favorite quotes, and it reminds, as I think of the importance of compassion in preparedness training, and when we assume our staff are doing the best they can with the tools and information they have, it shifts our approach a little bit, right? And when I was doing an exercise with our staff, one of our staff members broke down in tears. Not because she didn't care about the content, but because the training made her realize how unprepared she felt personally. And she had just had a new baby, and she didn't know who would care for her newborn if she couldn't make it home. And so that really was a turning point for her and for many others. And it reinforced the need to meet staff with that understanding, that flexibility, and some real world tools that they can take home with them. Because our job really isn't to deliver disaster protocols, really, right? It's to foster a culture that supports readiness and resilience without shame or without fear. And so doing that in a meaningful way, I think is really important. So any questions for me, or you can put them in the chat. I know I probably talked longer than I should have, but next slide, Julie. So let's pause for a quick poll. We'd love to get a sense of how you're doing evacuation training at your facilities, ties in with all of the questions earlier, what's working, what's missing, whether staff are getting the support they need. And by incentivized training, right, we mean, are they getting paid? Are they getting candy bars? Is it fun for them? Is it something they look forward to? Are they getting free swag? Are they going in a drawing? Like all of those creative ways that you can use if you don't have very much money, all those Christmas presents that you got that you really don't like, that you put into a little basket and then staff get to draw from them. Like that's something that we also started to do too, as ways to incentivize staff to do things. Oh, I love, there's like a lot that are doing required and hands-on. Not so many are doing the short micro drills or skill checks, it looks like. And nobody's using their white elephant Christmas gifts for incentivized learning. What's up with you guys? Well, maybe you should start. Are we done? I'm going to take a picture of this. Are we done with poll, Julie?
Got one more. There we go.
Oh, and this goes back to Pat's comment, right? I know California is definitely got some different rules, at least to our state. So a mix, but a lot more yeses sometimes. I think this is definitely true for ours too. Great. Cool. Thanks, Julie. Thank you, everybody, for participating in a poll. It definitely at least makes me feel like I'm not solo in some of the things that we do. Well, let's go to some of your favorite parts, right? Many of you have indicated that small group sessions are some of your favorites. So Julie is going to break everyone into small groups. I think we've got Kathy, Abby, Pat, and Shayna that are going to be leads on the breakout groups. And so you'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more from all of those as you go into your groups. But we are going to spend the next little while on a couple of questions. Julie, do you want to go to the next slide with the questions on? So we're going to talk about kind of what we started out a little earlier. Pat kind of got us started with Jack's session, and then Shayna finished that out too. So what's working in your facility to train staff on evacuation equipment specifically, or if there's any ideas that could then kind of be used for evac equipment, and then how you engage and sustain buy-in, especially because there's this constantly revolving door and there's a lot of time constraints. I don't know about any of you, but I know that that we sometimes will see that we get people, but then they're pulled to the bedside because people call in sick. So we thought we had everyone involved, but now, you know, patient care takes priority and they're pulled back. So we're going to go into breakouts, and Julie put the questions in the chat so you can carry them with you into your breakout sessions. And Julie, do we have 15 or 20 minutes? I haven't been watching time very well. Are we 15?
I think we're going to be more like 10 to 12.
Perfect. Okay. Just pull us back whenever you're ready. Well, this is one of my favorite parts. We get to hear from all of you what's working and how you engage and sustain buy-in. So I was just in a great group with Shayna. So Shayna, I'm going to pick on you first so you can report out some of the things that were talked about in our group.
You know, I think we talked about how I think incentivizing staff is helpful, but that's not standard across institutions, even within the same city. And so that I think can go a long way. It's hard though, I think, particularly this last season, at least for us, everyone was required to pick up extra shifts. And so it's hard for them to want to, even if they're getting paid, particularly nurses, you know, get paid to come in to do these, to maybe want to do it if they have already picked up so many extra shifts over the last 6 months. I think that's challenging. But Annette made a good point too, that when you ask someone to come in, they have to find childcare, and that if you're not incentivizing them, that makes that challenging to pay for childcare, and or to want to come in if it's a mandatory volunteer event, that then it doesn't look very professional. And I think, you know, I talked about decon, but I didn't really talk about pulling out the sleds and how, because that was just our last exercise, but we don't always pull out the sleds, or if we're practicing, you know, we had talked about in the past, at least Annette had mentioned this a while back, that if you have time in the shift to pull things out and practice with people, that works really well, because then it's kind of like on the job training. They're already there for their shift. But we've found, just because we've been so busy, even at the start of the summer, that's hard to fit in. And yeah, I think, you know, Abby talked a lot about at making it part of the, you know, the expectations, and how sometimes drills are really fun, and that helps staff to be more likely to participate when it's something new and exciting outside of their day-to-day. So that's a great point. That's fun. And we had a ton of kids. Julianne did a great job of recruiting children for our exercise. And so we had a bunch of great kids that participated. But then, as you know, we have the parents walk through it with them. And so that took out a bunch of our staff when their kids were participating, and they walked through with their kids. So, but they at least were there participating in a different way. So that was nice.
Let's go to Kathy and Pat and Abby. If you guys want to jump in with something that resonated with you that you can share with the group, that would be awesome.
Yeah, two things were that we were talking about. One was in terms of engaging and sustaining buy-in, the recommendation to target the new staff. Because there's been so much turnover, you have kind of like new people coming in with a fresh perspective. They haven't been beaten down, so to speak, yet. And so they're easier to engage and motivate, or set a cadence for training that may have not been there before. The other pieces is that definitely we need to incorporate a lot more fun into these exercises. It definitely helps with the whole situation. But there's a challenge with disaster exercises. You know, we try in emergency management, we're supposed to basically design an exercise. And a lot of times we design it for to give ourselves a pat on the back, which is really not what we're supposed to do. We're actually supposed to design it for failure. But if you want to build capability, that's a whole different educational process in terms of being able to take something more incrementally and combine both cognitive and psychomotor associated with it. So we have to make sure that as part of our capability planning and exercises, that we're aware that there's different educational pathways or strategies that have to be incorporated in order to achieve the same result or a better result.
Mhm. Kathy, anything fast to add? I think you muted, my friend.
We were just talking about strategic planning. So the importance of like knowing what's on your HVA and really strategizing. So if earthquake's on your HVA, maybe the great shakeout every year, start around there, make fun competitions, and then kind of grow what you do. The idea of super users on floors, both AM and PM shifts. So maybe if you don't hit everybody, you at least have some super users, and whether they're stipends or not sure. And then just at the end, the power of data, especially with your C-suite. There's definitely evacuations and they're on the rise. We were discussing, they tend to be actually more natural disaster. And then we were in a really good conversation, and it was on the fact that we need more information on how much equipment do hospitals actually have, because we suggest it's woefully unprepared. And I can tell you, we had to put RFID locators on our evacuation equipment because they kept getting moved. They kept getting, just so we could determine where they were, because they were not always where they were supposed to be. And we surely do not have one for every bed.
Yeah, those are great points. Abby, anything to throw in for final?
Sure. Yeah, we talked about, if you've got an opportunity with a new system coming on or a change out of something, and you can use that opportunity as a drill or a test of your system, take every advantage of an opportunity that you have. We discussed how, different people need different methods, QR codes that lead to one pagers that lead to videos. Not everyone learns and gets their information the same way, so multiple methods is always a bonus. And then we also discussed that, if you're having a drill, not everyone needs to be included in the planning, because then everyone knows what's going to happen. And that sometimes the intent of drills and exercises is to drill to failure. And if you plan for the drill and the exercises and everybody does it wonderfully, what have you really learned about your operation? And so it's okay to not do things great when you exercise, because that's how you find your gaps.
I love that. And what you said, Abby, actually ties into the next slide. So Julie, let's go to next slide. That was like totally unplanned, but it really kind of leans into adult learning variants, right? Like some of us do well with the safety huddle, so like that bring it in and those reminders that we can talk about just super fast snips. Or there's the checklist people that are very visual, right? So you've got your checklists and your evacuation places in strategic areas around the unit. You've got your QR and your just-in-times for your equipment, your videos, and your links, and then those fun people, those yellow people. If any of you have ever done the color code, I have got 0 yellow in me. But there's the Jeopardy templates and the things that Kathy talked about that make learning fun. And then there's the snacks, right? Because that is always the best part about working a night shift. But the scavenger hunt, and you get a snack, or a focused education and you win a candy bar or something. But people will do anything for all of that. So those are our quick wins and resources that we've talked about in past sessions. And I will turn it back to Julie.
Thank you. Thanks to all of our speakers today. Great conversation. The report outs were awesome. If you can hang on for just a few extra minutes, we want to just give you a snapshot of where we are in the DRC, other than our monthly sessions. Again, the PD pack is ongoing. We're going to continue and we're going to hold that open. But I am asking for you to complete your focus area session by next Wednesday, so a week from tomorrow. And that way we can include that in the DRC environmental scan data. And as we move forward in August and September, we're really going to start using that data to do quality improvement and how do we improve. So go ahead and finish at least your evacuation section in the PD pack. Also, if you have done a TTX, so whether it's been a DRC-led virtual TTX or your own hospital TTX, or maybe even you've done some kind of drill or other TTX-like component of your to test your plan, you should have received a data collection survey over the last month. If you have not received that, and I sent that to a team lead, the facilitator, or the evaluator, if you did a VTTX, but all team leads should have received that survey. So if you did not, please reach out to me at dncppn@austin.utexas.edu. I think I put that in the chat earlier, and I'll get you that survey. Also, it's never too early to start planning for your full-size drill later on in the fall. So maybe coming up with a date and who to invite to that. Our next DRC session is August 5th, so that's going to be the full collaborative session and everybody coming together. This QR code will get you to that registration, but the link that you had in June will also is the same link for the August session. The September 2nd will come back with the evacuation focus area. Those invites and registration links will be sent out this week, so be looking for those. Here is your continuing education code, DUHNAH. You'll need to either text that to this phone number or go to the portal here at this link and put that code in, and that will give you your continuing education credit. That up for just a second. And you don't have to stick around for this. You can open the link to the evaluation and it will pop up the survey for the session evaluation. Again, all of your feedback is used. We look at it. We want to improve. We want to make these sessions better for you. And we've gotten some fantastic feedback over the last several months. So appreciate everybody who does that. And we'll ask you to do it for today's session as well. And once you've opened that, either with the QR code or the link in the chat, you can log off and complete that. and have a wonderful day, a wonderful week. Be safe this weekend, and we'll see you in August. Thanks, everybody. Thanks to our speakers as well.